Hey, all, it's Tom. But want to do a series for a while and just haven't gotten around to it because I'm busy here doing stuff. Um, what I wanted to do is just tell you guys. I know you like them old stories about the past and whatever. Just tell you about some people I met through my career here, and it could be interesting. So we're going to start the series. There's probably 4 or 5 guys. But we're going to start the series with a gentleman by the name of Shotgun. We're going to leave surnames out. But when I grew up in Mount Cobb, there was a gentleman who lived on a back road in a town called Red Oaks. Now, everybody knew him as Shotgun. And he'd been around for eons. This guy, I think he was born in 1886. He died in the early 90s at 93 years old, so somewhere around the 1886 area. What a character. So when you went to Tom's house, you go down and you turned off. You went down the one road. You turned off into his driveway, which was about a half mile up in the woods. His house was right up against the I don't know, cliff up in there. It was an old farmhouse. It was an old farmhouse. So let me explain the driveway. Dirt driveway. You go about a quarter of a mile and you kind of veer to the left. And you come across this little bridge separating the creek that ran there, Jones's Creek. You had to stop at the bridge and blow your horn. Now, when you stopped at the bridge and blew your horn, you look out the window, make sure he knew you. If he knew you, you're okay. Come across the bridge. Because if you didn't blow the horn, he didn't tell you to come across because he'd wave, out the window. You had a load of buckshot. He didn't care. I had a 75 Riviera that I put a new radiator in because he didn't recognize the new car, and I had 3 holes in my radiator. No kidding. So you go across this bridge, and you go the rest of the way up to his house, which was about another quarter of a mile. And in front of the farmhouse, there was a big pond. In that there was fish galore. I mean, there was bass in there like the size of your arm because nobody ever fished, and it's been there for years. On the other side of the road was a little what he called watering pond that he used to draw their water from. And right next to the house there was a small pond that was fed by a spring that he tapped coming out of the cliff. So this was absolutely pure spring water going in this pond. And that's where he kept his fish supply. He had rainbow and native trout in there that were anywhere between 5 to 15 pounds. You could sit there for hours and watch them swim and drool because you couldn't fish it. Not that pond anyway. And every night he'd go out with a handful of fish nuggets, throw them on the pond, and the place would just erupt. Somebody wanted a fish, and they got fish hungry or whatever. They went out and he had this big like a bass dip net. Sorry about the shaking. I don't have my tripod yet. So he had this bass net. He'd go out and he'd throw the pellets out. They'd come over to the dock. He'd dip with the net and get 1 or 2 fish. Take them back to the house and they'd fry them up. So that's basically the layout of the property. Tom's back door was in the woods. He owned a lot of acreage up there that bordered on the Gravity Railroad bed. And that's another whole story. I spent a couple of weeks up in there, and boy, it was gorgeous. It was right up against Archibald and the Music Mountains. Oh, man, it was beautiful in there. As the Jones's Creek, the one I mentioned before, ran out of a place called Music Lakes. And it was full of native brook trout, and big ones. And there was a couple of nice deep pools in there. Oh, some place to behold. So, now when you walked to Tom's house, there was a kitchen, dining room, the living room, and the bathroom. downstairs, and upstairs was 3 bedrooms. Now, when you came into the kitchen, there was an old coal-fire wood stove, the wood gas, old agate cast iron stove, an old kitchen table, and of course your pantries and stuff like that. And with all old farmhouses, you always had that old scent of wood, oak, basically. Everything in that house was lead-based paint and oak. So typically when you went in, there was a bottle of Shine on the table or a bottle of Rock Gut whiskey. And he had his beer and his shot, and that's what he did all day. He sat there and he had his shot and his beer and watched the animals outside the window. And he lived with an older lady, and they were companions, and she took very good care of him. So that was the kitchen area. When you went into the living room, there was 3 gun cabinets that held 10 guns. Now the walls around the living room were stacked with military and any kind of rifle or shotgun you'd ever want to dream of. He had 3 like Winchester 88s in there and all kind of stuff. It would make you drool. And every now and then he'd sell a couple off for a few extra bucks. So just while we're on the subject of guns, I got a 22 Magnum Winchester 94 off of him. I looked at the gun. I didn't know much about guns then. He's like, well, yeah, it's only a 22 and this, that. I said, so what do you want for it? He said, catch me a mess of bullheads. I said, okay, so I went and got him a mess of bullheads, 7 or 8 of them, and cleaned them up, brought them over to the house. And the trade was made. Beautiful gun. I was an idiot to ever sell it. In Tom's drawer, now, he must have had 200 rifles and shotguns, maybe even 300. But Tom always carried a 38 Smith & Wesson Model 10 with him. That was the parlor. In the drawer in the parlor sat this 38. When Tom went anywhere, the 38 went with him. I never did go upstairs in the house, and that's their bedrooms and stuff. That's a private thing. But from what I understand, the upstairs bedrooms looked just like the parlor. There was guns stacked under, over, anywhere. And the ammo to beat the band. He had ammo for every gun in the house. But he kept this old Wesley Richards with 32-inch barrels next to the window. And that was loaded with buckshot. He had a small, coach gun that he kept under the table in the kitchen loaded with rock salt and buckshot for the bear and stuff that came down. Tom was old enough. He told me stories where he lived with the Indians up on the Delaware when he was a kid back in the early 1900s. And he was an honorary member of the Lenni Lenape tribe, or the Delaware, depending on how you want to do it. Now, he told me stories of camping, hunting, fishing, that early 1900s, and, some of the wildest areas up here, Pike County and Monroe County, Gas Hollow, Frytown. And Frytown to this day is still nothing but miles upon miles of wood, swamps, you name it. He lived through a cholera epidemic. He lived through the Spanish flu epidemic. He lived through all this stuff. It was interesting sitting down talking to these old guys, not just because they were woodsmen, but just to hear the stories of old days. Because he still had his hunting outfit that he bought in I think he said 22 or 23, which was a Woolrich jacket that must have weighed 20 pounds. That thing was like a half-inch thick wool. The red plaid ones. And the pants that went with it. And they look like knickers, but, knickers are pants that just come down like the knee and cut off at the knee, and then you wore long socks up to the rest of your calf. And the jack boots and everything that went with it. He had the whole outfit. It was amazing to see. And some of his knives that he had a hunting knife that he bought in 1919. It was basically just a piece of steel worn to a tip. There was no resemblance of a real knife, with the long, upswept tip and everything. He had that knife since 1919, and that's what he used to hunt with. Now, him and my dad were friends, really good friends. So we'll bring you back on part 2, and we'll talk about Dad and Tom's friendship.